course of American history, we have changed the voting age in this country on multiple occasions, right? Or we changed the voting requirements, at least, on multiple occasions. And when we established this country, we know who is allowed to vote. White male property owners. Do most white men own property? What do we think? Yes or no?
Yes.
The answer is yes. Okay? You have to realize that land is in abundance at this point. The population is very small. It's not difficult to gain ownership of land, especially if you're willing to work hard and move further into the interior of the country. All right? So that's what we initially had. All right? The 15th Amendment is one of our earliest changes to our parameters on who is allowed to vote. Okay, this bans voting discrimination on the basis of race. It essentially, for all intents and purposes, affords black men the right to vote. Only black men. All right? There have been other provisions as well. All right, the 24th Amendment bans any sort of poll tax. That's an issue that is being brought up today. We talked about this with the very first unit, right? We have free and fair elections in this country, yes? We remember this conversation? Are they truly free? Possibly not. Okay, and there are people who want to make the argument that forcing somebody to pay for an ID in order to be able to cast a vote is the essential equivalent to a poll tax, which would be problematic and would be in violation of the Constitution. Okay, we get rid of the any sort of literacy test, grandfather clause. Once literacy tests and poll taxes and things like that are eliminated, the grandfather clause becomes unimportant. All right. Now, in regards to voting specifically, this is one of these instances or one of these times where federalism sort of rears its head and is going to have to play a role in this. All right. Who controls voting? The states or the federal government? The states individually, right? And that's why in some states today we have voter ID laws. In other states we do not. Okay, the Voting Rights Act of '65 affords the national government the opportunity to go in and regulate voting in states that are deemed to have engaged in historically some manner of voter suppression. So if voter suppression has occurred in a state, then the national government can come in and begin to regulate what's going on in the individual states. All right? Okay? This way you end up with the national government counting ballots. Okay? Believe it or not, this is one of the comical things. Like Trump was running around before the election talking about how it's rigged. Do we know who counts the ballots? State government. Do we know who controls the majority of state governments? The majority of our governors are either A, Republican, or B, Democrat. What is it? Is that a 50-50 shot? I guess I'm correct. They're Republicans. Okay? So if the system is rigged, Trump is essentially saying his own party is rigging it against him. It's kind of comical. Now, my assumption is Trump has no idea who actually counts the ballots. I think that's probably the more likely scenario, is that Trump's just talking without understanding what he's really talking about. He seems to do that a fair amount. Right? But the Voting Rights Act empowers the federal government to come in and they can actually count ballots. They can oversee the election process. Right? They can ensure that there are provisions in place to where things like voter intimidation don't occur, okay, or anything else that would be deemed illegal. Alright? Again, one of the basic ideas about our civil rights and civil liberties is we're supposed to be able to cast our vote for whoever we want without undue influence. Okay? And again, this is something that in the last election cycle actually did come into play. Okay? Because during during the primary process up in Massachusetts, which was a very hotly contested Democratic state, Bill Clinton went into a polling place and told people, vote for my wife. That's a federal crime. Not that Bill Clinton gets charged with anything because his last name is Clinton. Okay? But that is an issue that we have in terms of our elections. Okay? With the voting rights of 65, we're going to see massive increases in black voter turnout. Like I told you yesterday, by the time we get to the late 60s, we see black people actually being elected to public offices and representing specifically black districts. Okay? A lot of this comes from the federal government coming in and regulating voting, specifically in southern states, because it's southern states that have had the historical history of, okay, but have had the history of voter suppression, of doing things that are meant specifically to prevent minorities from being able to come out and vote. Okay, now, private discrimination. So we talked about discrimination yesterday. Okay, private discrimination is a little bit different. And again, this is something that we see frequently in today's society because we commonly have instances in which private business owners are trying to claim sort of their own freedoms, right? And the examples that are most commonly thrown around are like a floral shop or a bakery, okay, that might be owned by somebody who is devoutly religious, therefore they don't want to provide flowers or a wedding cake to a gay wedding, right? Because it violates their morality as a person, okay? This is one of the things that the government has to deal with or attempt to regulate or at least have some sort of response to. Okay? There are a number of states right now that are basically passing laws that are essentially allowing that type of discrimination, right, with no recourse on the consumer. Basically, when you look at it, there's really three alternatives, all right? And there's only three sort of responses. The basic democratic response is force them to do it anyways, right? Make them bake the cake. Okay? Now, I don't know about you, but if somebody made me bake a cake that I didn't want to bake, do you think I would make a good cake? I wouldn't. Right? If you're forcing me to do something I don't want to do, I'm going to make it the crappiest, nastiest cake ever. You ain't even going to want to eat it. Okay? Which then leads me to question, why would these people force somebody to do something if ultimately the easiest response from the individual is to just do a terrible job? Right? I mean, how many of you want to get married with a wedding cake that's unedible? Right? That's like one of the few things men actually like or enjoy about a wedding. Yeah, I say that as a married man. Weddings aren't fun for men. It's all about the ladies. Okay? But you get my point. Right? So that's the Democratic sort of ideology or response. Force them to do it anyways. The Republican response is, no, these are people. You can't, it's free exercise of religion. You can't force them to do it. If they have a problem with gay marriage, that you shouldn't force them to bake a cake. Right? They're allowed to stand their ground for religious reasons. Okay? And the individual can't do anything about it, right? So if you're having a gay wedding and you're trying to get a cake and the bakery says no, oh well. And there's a third response. And in all honesty, the third response probably wouldn't have worked 100 years ago, but it would work pretty well today. Okay? And the third response is truly a basic capitalist response of let the market take care of it itself. Okay, because all of you have multiple social media accounts, right? Okay, so if Will walked into a bakery and tried to order a cake, right, and the baker looked at him and was like, nah, sorry man, I don't sell cakes to blonde-haired white boys. What's Will going to do? Will's going to complain on social media. Okay? And in reality, we as people, our number one response for anybody, because this is the number one response for the government too. Everything boils down to money, to economics. Hey, if you had me last year for U.S. history for A. Bush, I told you that if there was a question where it asked you why did something happen, right, and one of your options was money, probably the right answer. Okay? Money is something that is quintessential in terms of how we function and how we act. Okay? I've told you in the past, I love my job. If you stop paying me, I ain't coming anymore. Okay? No matter how much I enjoy this, I'm not doing it for free. So here's the thing. Will gets on social media, okay? And he starts tweeting, and Will's got enough followers who retweet him, and it just spreads, that all of a sudden here's this terrible bakery in Sugarland that's not going to serve Will because he's a white guy with blonde hair. Right? That should, theoretically, okay, create a backlash against the bakery. What happens to the bakery then? It loses money. When businesses begin to lose money, what happens to said business? It goes out of business. Okay? So in reality, if you have a business that is engaging in any type of discriminatory action, right, simply protest it. Right? Put them on blast, let everybody know what's going on, and hopefully the majority of Americans, because the majority of them, I mean, more than 50% of Americans are fairly progressive. Right? I mean, I'm personally not a homosexual, but if there's a bakery that did not allow or would refuse to bake a cake for a gay couple simply because they were gay, I'm not going to give them my money. Right? If they refused to bake a cake for somebody because they're black, I'm not black, but I'm not going to go give them my money either. Okay? And you would hope that other sort of enlightened, educated, informed Americans, you would hope most Americans would behave in that way. Now, certainly there would be the small subset of the people that would be like, yay, let's go support the bakery. Okay? Inevitably there will be. Okay? I mean, you're going to get like the Westboro Baptist Church type people that are going to go to that bakery and be like, you're awesome, we're going to buy stuff here. Okay, here's the basic premise though, right? Because I'm going to tell you right now, if any of you want to become an entrepreneur one day and you want to start your own business, probably a pretty good policy is to not turn down business, regardless. Okay? Because ultimately you should see every potential client as being the same color, green. Alright? Now, in terms of private discrimination, we have had legislation that's been created over the course of time. As I've just talked about, this is something that is continuing to evolve. Okay? Just so you understand, too, that third response is really more of a like free market economic response versus a political response, in case you care. Okay? So we do create various pieces of federal legislation that are going to try to utilize the Commerce Clause of the Constitution in order to regulate private business. Okay? Heart of Atlanta Motel versus United States is a good example of this, in which discrimination is not permissible due to interstate commerce. The national government can actually step in and regulate it, and it's not just the responsibility or the opportunity of the state. Okay? We have pieces of legislation that respond not only to race, but also specifically to gender bias or sort of complaints based on the sex of the individual. And this is something that sadly still happens frequently in this day and age. Okay? And ladies in the room, you might actually experience this at some point in time. When you graduate from college and you go to apply for a job, somebody might ask you, do you want to have children? Okay? And that's a loaded question that they really should not ask you in an interview, because one, that's a personal, private decision for you. Two, if you say yes, right, then a lot of them are like, oh, that means she's going to take all kinds of time off, she's not going to work hard, she's going to care more about her family, right? Whereas men don't get that question in interviews, right? Despite the fact that, I mean, those of you who know me well, like if my daughter's sick, you know I ain't going to be here. Okay? My family still comes first. just like most people's would. But men are not held to the same standard or the same accountability as what women are. All right? All right, Civil Rights Act of 68. This is in terms of fair housing. Okay? Again, one of these ways or one of these issues that people had. Okay? There are instances, historically it doesn't happen as much anymore, where you would go into a place like New York City, you'd see an apartment building, it'd have a for rent sign out front, right? If somebody of the wrong ethnicity walked in, they'd be like, oh, sorry man, we just rented it, right? Just hadn't taken the sign down yet, okay? Or they would change like the price, okay, and try to price people out of it, okay, so to create something to where there would be no opportunity, no economic opportunity for you to be able to do that, right? Again, not acceptable. These are pieces of legislation that have been created over the course of time, and they all fall under interstate commerce. Fair housing, maybe not really interstate commerce, obviously, but still anti-discriminatory law, litigation, or anti-discriminatory legislation, still fairly significant. And we've done the same thing over time for age, as well as individuals with disabilities, right? Now, citizenship, because this gets into a very important aspect of what we're looking at over the course of sort of our understanding of who gets rights, why they get rights, et cetera, et cetera. All right, we talked about this a little bit before in terms of who civil rights and civil liberties applies to, right? Because we talked, does the Constitution only apply to citizens? We said no, right? Because if you're an immigrant and you come here, do you still get to practice whatever religion you want? Yes, right? Do you still have freedom of speech? Yes, right? Can you be thrown in prison without being put on trial if you're an immigrant? No. Okay? So, we realize, maybe a few exceptions for what we deem to be enemy combatants down in Guantanamo Bay, and that our rights apply pretty much to everybody on American soil. However, citizenship was something that was used over the course of history to systematically deny rights to certain individuals. And the 14th Amendment actually has what is called the Citizenship Clause, which defines citizenship on a federal level, which means if you are a citizen of the United States, by definition, you must also be a citizen of whatever state you reside in. Make sense? You cannot be an American citizen and have the state of Texas say that you're not a Texan. Yes, ma'am.
Is it true that if you're born on like a U.S. base overseas, you're still a U.S. citizen by birth?
Definitely. That is absolutely true, right? In fact, that holds true to John McCain. Do we know who John McCain is? Former presidential candidate. He's a sitting senator from the state of Arizona. John McCain was born in Panama, right, on a U.S. military installation down there because of the Panama Canal, right? Here's the thing, though. This idea of a natural-born citizen, as it pertains to the Constitution or a requirement to be President of the United States, that's actually never really been clearly defined. Ted Cruz, who is a senator, sitting senator here from the state of Texas, anybody know where he was born? Canada. Was it on a military installation? Nope. Is he eligible to be president? There were a lot of people that said no. There were a lot of people that said yes. Donald Trump said he was going to sue, because Donald Trump likes to sue people, okay, over whether or not Ted Cruz even had legal standing to be claiming citizenship. Now, my interpretation, and this is solely my interpretation because no court has, excuse me, no court has ever ruled on this, right? So I have no legal precedent to be like, well, the 3rd District Court said this, so that's what I believe. I personally believe, however, that Ted Cruz would classify as a natural-born citizen. Because to me, the definition of natural born citizen means at that point of birth, are you an American? Ted Cruz would have qualified because his mother is an American. Simply an American living abroad at that point. Okay? Conversely, anybody born in the U.S. is definitively a citizen. So if you have immigrant parents that are here legally or illegally, and you're born in the United States, you are an American. Right? Which again is a part of this whole issue over the deportation and immigration issues, because you have instances where individuals, right, are born here in the United States to parents that might be illegal, and then the question is, if the kid's 8 years old, you can't kick him out because he's an American citizen. If you kick mom and dad out, what do you do with the 8-year-old? Because I'm going to tell you right now, I'd much rather mom and dad stay here and take care of that 8-year-old than force that 8-year-old on the state and put him in foster care and do all kinds of things that would just be terrible to him. All right? There is a possibility of dual citizenship. The U.S. sometimes makes that really difficult. In fact, the U.S. does not allow, really, the sort of unofficial policy is the U.S. does not allow for dual citizenship. Or at least they didn't years ago. I don't know if they've changed that policy. No. You can have dual citizenship. You can. But what the U.S. used to make you do, and I don't know if they've changed this policy, they made you give up your citizenship wherever you were at, get American citizenship, and then you could go reapply for like Canadian citizenship. They used to make you do that. They don't make you do that anymore?
I didn't do that.
Okay.
You can only have two, so my parents had to give up like their Pakistani citizenship and kept their Canadian American.
Yeah, that's what happened in my.
Yeah, you can. I knew that. I know you can't be like a citizen of the world.
You have to take your second oath, like for the different country after your American one.
See, that's what it used to be.
That's what
Now I don't know. Is that not? That's not still true though.
No.
Like I said, I didn't. I thought that was changing. I hadn't done enough research to know one way or the other. I mean,
My dad had to do that, but my mom didn't. I remember.
okay. See, so that's a relatively new phenomenon, and I think it's simply because the United States is beginning to realize that this sort of idiocracy about the U.S. being far and above everybody else, and therefore you can't be a citizen of another country first if you want to be a U.S. citizen is a little ridiculous. Naturalization, this is the process in which an alien acquires citizenship. We say alien, that just means any immigrant, anyone who's come here, either, well, I guess theoretically you have to have come here legally to get citizenship. There's a number of things that have to happen in that regard in order to obtain citizenship. Some of them are easier than others. There's a multitude of ways through it. One of the easiest ways, honestly, is to serve in the military. Right? If you serve in the military, they expedite your naturalization process. Right? So when I was in the Marine Corps, I served with, well, one Mexican, one Vietnamese, and one South Korean, all in the same unit. Right? Like the three of them were not American citizens, yet they were in the United States Marine Corps. So, easy way to get it done. You can lose your citizenship, right? It's difficult to do, right? Well, expatriation, becoming an expat, that's not difficult to do. Okay, that's you voluntarily giving it up. And there are people that do that. Right? It would have been interesting if a bunch of celebrities had actually kept their word, because so many people said they were leaving if Donald Trump became president. I don't know, maybe they're still holding out hope that something's going to happen between now and 11 a.m. tomorrow. Right? Denaturalization, on the other hand, would be stripping somebody of citizenship, and that can occur for a couple of reasons, although it generally doesn't happen. Right? I mean, even people who are committed of something like treason are generally not stripped of their citizenship. There was even a case not too long ago of an American who went somewhere to the Middle East and joined like ISIS or the Taliban or whatever. And I want to say he joined the Taliban, and they did not strip him of his citizenship. All right. So there's your definition of aliens, again, immigrants, people living in the US that belong to or are a citizen of another country. You can have resident and non-resident aliens, simply legal, simply permanent or temporary, okay, legal or illegal, right, all that stuff. There are some other small stipulations in terms of refugees or individuals who are granted asylum for whatever reason. And for the longest time in American history, if you came here from Cuba, right, like if you got on a boat in Cuba and you paddled that 90 miles or whatever it is, and you washed up on the shore of Florida, you automatically got to stay. Okay? And that was due to what we consider a refugee situation, right? They are politically oppressed in Cuba, which the U.S. then gave them sort of asylum here and allowed them to live here. That policy actually changed within the last month, okay? And it's due solely to really what Obama has done over the course of his presidency, because Obama has begun to normalize relations with Cuba, right? In which case, if Cuba's sort of friendly again, then you can no longer claim refugee status as a political sort of prisoner or whatever. Yes, ma'am.
If you're here for college, are you a resident or a non-resident? Or you just not here?
If it's just college, you're generally classified as non-resident because it's a temporary purpose. It doesn't mean that you can't maintain or remain after the fact. You would just have to then go and get a different, like you'd have to file different paperwork from my understanding. The truth of the matter is our immigration policies are ridiculously complex. Okay? It's actually really hard to get to the United States legally. It is, which is why so many people come illegally, okay? Because that's considerably easier to do. Right? And people can come illegally and stay here for decades. And because they go and take a job somewhere with a fake social security number, and it takes the IRS like a decade to realize that that's a fake social security number, or that it doesn't belong to that individual. It's kind of absurd. And whereas my wife has a very, very good friend who grew up in North Carolina. Her parents were immigrants from Mexico. They were here in legal status. When she graduated from high school, technically she was no longer allowed to be here legally. So she moved back to Mexico with extended family, went to college in Mexico, is a nurse, is obviously fluent in English because she lived in North Carolina from second grade through 10 years, right? And she has spent the last 4 years trying to get back into the United States, and has a degree in a profession that the United States claims we are in need of. And this woman can't get back legally. Her parents have since become citizens. They went through the whole process and got their citizenship and everything, but because she was no longer a minor, she got booted, which is absurd. All right. We're still on aliens? Yeah. Okay. They basically get all the same rights, except they don't get a vote, they don't serve on juries, and they can't hold certain positions. All right. This is part of what I was talking about here, okay, about how difficult that it really is to get into the U.S. And it's a complex system. Honestly, anybody who, it's why most politicians, Republicans and Democrats alike, believe that immigration reform is necessary. Even Republicans do. Okay? They just don't agree as to how to accomplish it, and they certainly don't agree what to do with the individuals that are already here. Okay? But there was a period of time where immigration reform was a bipartisan policy where both Republicans and Democrats were working on it together, trying to figure it out. Okay? Political refugees, like I said, we do take some of those. Most of them have come from Cuba over the course of time. We have taken some over the last 20 plus years from Eastern Europe who are trying to escape communist countries there. Obviously, because we were at war with communism for so long, anybody fleeing communism we generally provided asylum for, right? Or we gave them refugee status. Okay. basically, right, now we have issues with terrorism and who we're letting into this country. Okay, again, this shouldn't surprise you when Donald Trump was talking about a registry for all Muslims and no more Muslims into the country until they can be vetted. Not that there's any way to actually do that, but hopefully you realize that those are all concerns. Okay, go ahead and pack up, we're out of time.
No, like for real, like, no, Mr. Tucker.
Yes, ma'am.